I woke to the sound of rain drumming on the roof of my old house in Greenwood. 73 years of life had taught me to be sensitive to any change in the weather, my joints aching, warning me of impending inclement weather before the first drops hit the ground. I slowly got out of bed, fumbled for my slippers, and wandered into the kitchen. The morning ritual hadn't changed in years. Heat the kettle, brew some strong tea, and eat the toast with orange jam I bought at the farmer's market every first Saturday of the month. It was a breakfast I had once shared with Eleanor, now only with memories of her. Today marks exactly 3 years since she passed away. 3 years of loneliness in a house we'd filled with life together for nearly 5 decades. I looked at the empty chair across from me. Eleanor always sat there, with a cup of herbal tea she brewed in a small clay teapot. She said that regular tea was too strong for her, and I teased that she drank tinted water. I smiled at these thoughts, but the smile was quickly replaced by a familiar bitterness. After she left, my world shrank to the size of this house in the university library, where I occasionally went to peruse the new linguistics journals. 35 years of teaching ancient languages at Greenwood University had left behind only a retired gold watch and a collection of rare books that occupied my entire office. The phone rang, interrupting my train of thought. At this early hour, it was usually only telemarketers or wrong numbers calling. I didn't hurry to pick up the phone, but something made me answer it. "Good afternoon. Is this Professor Quigley's residence?" a young female voice asked. "Yes, it's me," I answered, not hiding my surprise. "My name is Yvonne Frost, and I am your son's personal assistant, Pierce Quigley. Mr. Quigley instructed me to contact you and give you an invitation to his 40th birthday party, which will be held this Saturday at 6 o'clock in the evening." I was silent, trying to comprehend what I had heard. Pierce is inviting me? Through his assistant? The last time I'd seen him had been Christmas Day, and it had been a fleeting visit. He'd stopped by for 15 minutes, handed me some faceless gift certificate, and left, citing an important meeting. "Excuse me, are you still on the line?" the girl asked. Yes, I said. "Tell Pierce I'll be there." "Great. Address: Oak Ridge Estate, 23. Dress code: semi-formal. Gifts are welcome, but not required," she mouthed a learned phrase. I grinned. Not required, of course. What could a retired professor give his successful son, a financial analyst living in Greenwood's most upscale neighborhood? Hanging up the phone, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Pierce, my only son, whom I'd practically lost long before he left his father's house. Eleanor had always been a buffer between us, smoothing over the rough edges, finding common ground with both my ever-busy husband and my rebellious teenager. I remembered the first time I'd held him in my arms, a tiny bundle with a red, wrinkled face. How I taught him to read, sitting in a soft armchair by the fireplace, patiently running my finger along the lines of an old book of fairy tales. How he'd taken him to the university, where he, 5 years old, would walk among the shelves of the library, pretending that he too was parsing ancient writings. And then something went wrong. Perhaps I was working too hard, trying to provide for my family and build an academic career. Perhaps I expected my son to inherit my passion for languages and history. When he chose economics and finance, I hid my disappointment, but apparently not well enough. We became two planets in different orbits, only occasionally crossing paths at family gatherings. Marriage to Blanche had finally alienated him. A bright, ambitious woman with a business school degree and connections in Greenwood high society, she had never hidden the fact that she considered her father-in-law's profession old-fashioned and unpromising. Ancient languages. But who needs that now? Only to dust museums, she had once said at a family dinner, and Pierce had not objected, only smiled strainedly. I got up and went to the window. The rain had intensified, turning my manicured garden into a blurry watercolor canvas. Eleanor loved our garden. Even in recent months, when her illness had nearly bedridden her, she'd asked to be wheeled out in her chair to the rose bushes we'd planted together the year Pierce was born. "What should I get him, Ellie?" I whispered, looking at the raindrops crashing against the glass. "What could be good enough for the man who has everything?" As if in answer to my question, the wind picked up and blew the window open. The gust blew into the room, knocking over Eleanor's picture on the windowsill. I picked it up, wiped the glass with my sleeve, and was about to put it back when I noticed that the edge of the frame had broken off, revealing the edge of a small key hidden behind the photograph. I had hidden that key there myself years ago and had almost forgotten about it. It opened the old safe in my study, where the most valuable family heirlooms were kept. Documents, some of Eleanor's jewelry, and the main treasure, the gold pocket watch of my grandfather, Professor Emmett Quigley, the foremost philologist of his day. I carefully retrieved the key and headed for the study. The safe was built into the wall behind one of the bookshelves. The mechanism was a little jammed. I hadn't opened it in years. Finally, the door gave way, and I saw a small velvet box. It was a solid yellow gold watch, engraved on the lid with the Quigley family crest and the date 1887. I opened the lid carefully. Inside, the Roman numerals were clearly visible on the mother-of-pearl dial. On the inside of the lid was an engraved inscription in Latin, Tempus neminem manae, time waits for no one. The clock was still running, even though I hadn't wound it in years. The special movement, created by a Swiss craftsman especially for my grandfather, worked almost flawlessly even after a century. Emmett Quigley received this watch from the board of Oxford University for his groundbreaking work in deciphering the Cretan linear letter A. They were passed down the male line, from Emmett to my father, from my father to me. Now it was Pierce's turn. I held the watch in the palm of my hand, feeling its pleasant heaviness. I had once dreamed of ceremonially handing it to my son, of telling him about our family's history, our legacy of knowledge and achievement. But as the years passed, the moment never came, and then it seemed that Pierce wasn't interested. In the last years of her life, Eleanor often said to me, "Norbert, give him the watch. Don't wait for a special occasion. Make the first move." But I was stubborn. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps fear of rejection. And now, what was stopping me from fulfilling her last wish now? I'd made up my mind. A 40th birthday is a significant enough date. The watch would be my gift. Perhaps this family heirloom will remind Pierce of his roots, that there are other values besides material success. But a watch needs proper wrapping. I went into the living room, where an old dresser held the things I'd inherited from my father. Among them was a small handmade wooden box made of mahogany with ivory inlay, a delicate floral design framing the lid. My father kept his cufflinks and tie clips in it, little symbols of the respectability of the Oxford professor of the 40s. I carefully wiped the box clean of dust and put the watch inside, wrapping it in a piece of soft suede. Perfect. The modesty of the box only emphasized the value of its contents, just as in our profession, where unseen writings often conceal treasure troves of ancient wisdom. The only thing left to do was to write a note explaining the meaning of the gift. I chose a sheet of heavy ivory paper, the kind I use for important letters, and in calligraphic handwriting of which I was proud, I wrote the history of the watch, from its creation to the time my grandfather received it and passed it on. I ended with lines from Virgil, Fugit irreparabile tempus, time runs irrevocably away. Let my son remember the transience of life and the importance of true values. When I finished my preparations, I sat down in my chair and looked at the box for a long time. To give it away was to let go of a part of my past, a part of what bound me to the previous generations of Quigley. But perhaps this gift could be the bridge between Pierce and me, the bridge Eleanor had dreamed of. The phone rang again. This time it was my former student Lydia, now chair of the Ancient Languages Department. She was calling to see if I would agree to give some guest lectures next semester. "Students still remember your classes, Professor Quigley," she said. "No one can bring ancient texts to life like you do." Her words warmed my heart. At least somewhere I was appreciated for who I was, for my knowledge, for my experience, for my passion for languages that open doors to civilizations long gone. "I'll think about it, Lydia," I replied. "I have a few personal matters at the moment, but I'll give you an answer by the end of the month." I hung up the phone and looked at the box again. In the 3 years since Eleanor's death, I'd been living in a fog, mechanically doing things, but not really engaged in life. Maybe it was time to get back, to teaching, to research, to people. Saturday was 3 days away, 3 days to gather my thoughts and prepare to meet my son. I wasn't under any particular illusions. One gift couldn't undo years of estrangement, but maybe it was a chance to start over. a chance I had to take for Eleanor's memory and for my own. I glanced once more at the box on the table. The antique clock inside it ticked, counting down the minutes of our lives. A time that waits for no one. Time that perhaps it wasn't too late to give meaning to. The morning of Pierce's birthday was surprisingly clear. I woke up earlier than usual with the anxious feeling of a man facing an important but unpleasant task. The first thing I did was check the clock box that was waiting on my desk. I had opened it several times over the 3 days, checked the clock, and reread the note I had written, as if questioning whether the history of the family heirloom was clear enough. The gold case gleamed in the morning light filtering through the lace curtains of my study. I carefully pulled out the watch and held it to my ear. The ticking was steady, soothing, as if a living heart was beating in the mechanism. My grandfather, Emmett Quigley, had gotten it in 1887 when he was 35, at the height of his scientific career. I pictured him, tall with a stubble beard and attentive eyes, as he was pictured in an old photograph in the family album. Emmett had spent several years on expeditions to Crete, studying ancient writings that were considered undeciphered before him. His persistence and analytical mind took the first steps toward understanding linear A writing, and his work laid the groundwork for generations of researchers to come. Every time I opened the lid of the clock and saw the engraving, Tempus Neminem Mane, it was as if I heard my grandfather's voice, which I knew only through my father's stories. Time waits for no one. This phrase defined his life. He worked with tireless passion, as if knowing that his time was limited. He died at 52 from pneumonia, which he contracted on his last expedition. My father, Hubert Quigley, was given the watch on the day of his majority. He followed in his father's footsteps by becoming a linguist, though he chose the less exotic specialty of Indo-European languages. Unlike his father was a methodical, cautious scholar, preferring quiet work in libraries to field research. During World War II, his knowledge of languages came in handy in the intelligence service, although he never gave details of that service. After the war, he took up a professorship at Oxford, where he worked until his retirement. I received the watch on the day I defended my doctoral thesis. My father solemnly handed me the box after the ceremony, saying, "Norbert, you are now carrying on the Quigley tradition. Wear this watch with pride and remember that time is a scientist's most valuable resource." At that time, at 26, full of ambition and plans, I did not fully understand the depth of his words. Now holding the watch in my hands, I realized that I had become the last in a chain of Quigley linguists. Pierce had chosen a different path. I didn't blame him. The world had changed, and ancient languages no longer seemed a promising field for a young man with ambition. But sometimes I wondered if there was nothing left in him of the passion for knowledge that had defined the lives of previous generations of our family. I carefully put the watch back in its box. No matter what happens today, I will fulfill the promise I made to Eleanor. I would pass the family legacy on to my son and let him decide what to do with it. I spent a few hours picking out a suitable outfit for the party. My closet was modest and somewhat old-fashioned. The last time I'd bought formal wear was about 5 years ago for a conference in Vienna. I finally settled on a navy blue suit, which Eleanor had always found most winning with my gray hair and blue eyes. I chose a burgundy tie with a faint geometric pattern. Conservative enough, but not boring. When I finished dressing, it was still 3 hours before the party started. I decided to reread the letter I'd put in the box. As I picked it up, I ran my eyes over the lines in my neat handwriting. "Dear Pierce, this pocket watch is not just a family heirloom. It is a symbol of the Quigley legacy, a reminder of those who have gone before us, opening new horizons of knowledge. Your great-grandfather, Professor Emmett Quigley, received it from Oxford University for his contribution to the decipherment of the Cretan linear letter A. From him it passed to your grandfather, Hubert, and then to me. Today, on your 40th birthday, I pass them on to you, completing the circle. Tempus Neminem Mane, the inscription on them reads, time waits for no one. May these words remind you of the transience of life and the importance of the legacy we leave behind. Love, your father." I reread the letter several times, questioning whether it was too sentimental. In the end, I decided to leave it as it was. These words came from the heart, and if Pierce was meant to understand their meaning, he would. At 4 o'clock, I hailed a cab. Oak Ridge Estate was 15 miles from my house, in the new upscale neighborhood of Greenwood, where land was worth a fortune. I wrapped the watch box in heavy paper and tied it with a simple twine. No fancy ribbons or bows. The contents spoke for themselves. The cab arrived exactly at the appointed time. The driver, an older man about my age, was chatty. "To Oak Ridge," he whistled when I gave him the address. "Only millionaires live there now. Who are you here to see if it's no secret?" "My son," I said briefly. "It's his birthday." "Really?" The driver cheered up. "That makes sense. I don't see my son much either. He moved to Seattle and works for a computer firm. He calls once a month and comes to visit at Christmas. That's life." I nodded, not wanting to pursue the subject. We drove through downtown Greenwood, past the university campus where I'd worked most of my life, then through newer neighborhoods with identical middle-class houses until finally we turned onto the wide oak-lined avenue that led to Oak Ridge. The contrast was stark. Here, each house stood on an expansive lot, separated from its neighbors by hedges or wrought iron fences. The mansions ranged in architectural style from neo, Tudor to ultra, modern, minimalist glass and concrete. "What's the house number?" the driver asked. 23, I answered, clutching the box tighter to me. We drove a little further and stopped at an imposing wrought iron gate with the number 23. The driver pressed the intercom button. "Cab for Mr. Quigley," he said. The gate opened silently and we drove on to the property. Pierce's house was a 3-story mansion in a modern style. White walls, panoramic windows, a flat roof with a terrace. In front of the house there was a perfectly manicured lawn with geometric flower beds. No naturalness. Everything is subordinated to a strict design. I paid the cab driver with a generous tip and headed for the front door. Several expensive cars were already parked in the driveway. Some of the guests had arrived early. The door was opened by a young man in uniform, apparently a waiter hired for the evening. "Good evening, sir. Your name?" "Norbert Quigley. I'm Pierce's father." "Please come in," he nodded, stepping aside. "The guests are gathering in the main parlor. May I take your gift?" "No, thank you," I replied, clutching the package tighter to me. "I'd rather give it to him in person." I entered the spacious hallway with marble floors and minimalist decor. Everything about it screamed money and status, from the designer furniture to the abstract paintings on the walls, which I was sure cost a fortune. Muffled voices and the sounds of jazz music came from the living room. Taking a deep breath, I headed toward the sound. The living room was astonishing in size. It must have taken up half of the first floor. Huge panoramic windows overlooked a backyard with a pool and gazebo. In the center of the room was a long table with snacks and drinks, and about a dozen guests were already gathered around it. I noticed Pierce immediately. He was standing in a circle of men about his own age, talking excitedly about something. My son looked successful and confident. A perfectly fitting suit, a fashionable haircut, an expensive watch on his wrist. He looked so much like me as a young man in appearance, but at the same time he was so alien. Next to him stood Blanche, a slender blonde in an elegant dark green dress that emphasized her figure. She was smiling and nodding, but I noticed that her gaze was constantly moving around the room, assessing the guests and the general atmosphere of the evening. I froze awkwardly at the entrance, not knowing how to make my presence known. Finally, Blanche noticed me and whispered something to Pierce. He turned around, looked at me for a second with an impenetrable expression, then apologized to his companions and came toward me. "Father," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Glad you could make it." "Ah, happy birthday, Pierce," I said, shaking his hand and fighting the urge to hug my son. 40 years is a milestone." "Yeah, half my life is behind me," he grinned. "I want you to meet my friends." He led me to a group of men he was talking to. "Gentlemen, this is my father, Professor Norbert Quigley." "Father, this is Victor Hammond. We went to business school together. He's now head of investment banking at Meridian Bank. Next to him is Elliot Price, my golf partner and co-owner of a construction company. And this is Thomas Royce, my neighbor, and also the best heart surgeon at Greenwood Clinic." I shook hands with each one. They were all polite, but I could feel their assessing glances. "Professor Quigley," Thomas Royce clarified, "do you teach at Greenwood University?" "I used to," I replied. "I've been retired for almost 10 years. My specialty was ancient languages." "How interesting," he said politely, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't interested at all. Blanche joined us, putting her arm around Pierce's waist in a gesture of ownership. "Professor Quigley, good to see you," she said with a rehearsed smile. "I hope you find the evening enjoyable." "Thank you for the invitation, Blanche," I replied. "You have a lovely home." "Oh, you haven't seen everything yet," she said. "Pierce, why don't you show your father the house, especially the library? I think he'd be interested." I realized that she wanted to get rid of my presence in the main group of guests, and Pierce realized it too. "Of course," he nodded. "Come on, father." We walked through the living room to the other wing of the house. On the way, I noticed that the other guests, mostly couples about the same age as Pierce and Blanche, were casting curious glances at me. The old man in the unfashionable suit must have been a bit of an eyesore. "Here's the library," Pierce said, opening the oak door. The room was impressive. High ceilings, shelves all the way up, leather armchairs, and a heavy desk by the window. But I noticed right away that most of the books looked untouched, and some shelves were filled with identical leather tomes, clearly bought in bulk for decoration. "Impressive," I said, trying to sound sincere. "Do you read a lot?" Pierce shrugged. "Not as much as I like. Work takes up most of my time, but sometimes I come here to think in silence." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. There was an awkward pause between us. "What have you got there?" Pierce finally asked, nodding at the package in my hands. "Your present," I answered, "but I'd rather give it with the others." "Suit yourself," he shrugged. "We should get back to the guests. We'll be cutting the cake soon." We returned to the living room, which was now almost completely filled. I counted about 30 people, all in expensive clothes with the confident manners of people accustomed to success and comfort. Blanche had organized everything with impeccable efficiency. Waiters were serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A jazz quartet was playing in the corner. The lighting was subdued and created an intimate atmosphere despite the size of the room. Pierce was immediately drawn into conversation with what appeared to be an important guest, and I remained standing against the wall, watching and holding my bundle tightly. I felt like an outsider at this celebration of life. Old-fashioned, out of place, forgotten. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes stopped next to me. "Hello, I'm Olivia Lang," she introduced herself. "You must be Pierce's father. The resemblance is obvious." "Snorbert Quigley," I nodded, grateful for the chance to talk to someone. "Yes, that's my son. I work with Blanche at the art gallery," she explained. "Did Pierce mention that you were a professor of linguistics?" "I was," I smiled. "Retired now." "How exciting!" And unlike the others, her interest seemed genuine. "What languages did you study?" "Xiaochuan, mostly ancient Mediterranean languages. Ancient Greek, Etruscan, the linear writing of Crete. My doctoral thesis was on the comparative analysis of Mycenaean and Etruscan writing systems." "God, how interesting," Olivia exclaimed. "You know, we have an exhibition of ancient artifacts in our gallery right now. There are some inscribed objects in there. Perhaps you'd be interested in taking a look?" I wanted to answer, but at that moment Blanche tapped her fork on the glass, attracting the attention of the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the evening's main event. Pierce, dear, please come to the table." A small table was set up in the center of the room, on which the waiters rolled out a huge cake with 40 candles. The guests gathered around and Pierce took center stage, smiling and accepting congratulations. "Before blowing out the candles," Blanche continued, "let's give the birthday boy his presents." One by one, the guests approached Pierce, handing beautifully wrapped boxes and envelopes. I watched as he opened some of them: an expensive watch from colleagues, an exclusive cognac, a golf club signed by a famous player. Each gift was accompanied by enthusiastic cheers and applause. I stood aside, still holding my modestly wrapped box, and pondered how my gift would look among all this splendor. My great-grandfather's watch was priceless from a historical and family perspective, but outwardly lost to modern luxury accessories. Would Pierce withstand the temptation to compare? Gradually, the line was coming toward me. Blanche glanced around the room and noticed that I had not yet presented my gift. She approached me with a professional smile. "Professor, it's your turn," she said loud enough to get the attention of those around me. I slowly made my way to the table where Pierce stood surrounded by a mountain of gifts. He looked at my humble bundle with a faint expression of bewilderment on his face. The room grew a little quieter, as if the guests were also interested in what the old professor might have given his successful son. I handed my son my modest package, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine. He looked like an orphan at a royal ball against the brightly wrapped gifts with their bows and ribbons. "It's from me, Pierce," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "Happy birthday." Pierce took the package with a polite smile, but I could see the slight shadow of disappointment in his eyes. The guests fell silent, watching curiously. There was a sense of awkwardness in the air, as if everyone had already anticipated that the old professor's gift wouldn't be up to the level of the party. "Thank you, Father," Pierce said in a formal tone, weighing the package in his hand. One of the guests, I recognized Victor Hammond, the banker I had been introduced to at the beginning of the evening, came up from the crowd. "Come on, Pierce, open it." Everybody's interested. Pierce looked at me as if asking permission. I nodded, though inwardly I hoped he would read the note in private, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. But I realized that would be against the rules of the game we were all playing here. He carefully untied the twine and unfolded the paper. In his hands was an antique wooden box with ivory inlay. There was a look of bewilderment on the faces of the guests. Clearly, no one had expected to see something like this among the new gadgets and designer accessories. Pierce looked at the box with an impenetrable expression. I expected him to open it, to read the note, to see the watch, but he just twirled the box in his hands and put it on the table among the other gifts. "An antique box?" he said with a strained smile. "Very original." The guests looked at each other awkwardly. Blanche came closer, took the box in her hands, and examined it with feigned interest. "What an antique," she said with a touch of condescension in her voice. "It must be from your collection, Professor?" "It was my father's," I answered calmly, though I was beginning to boil inside. "But it's not the box itself. It's what's inside. Pierce, don't you want to open it?" My son looked at me with slight irritation, clearly not wanting to keep the guest's attention on my humble gift. "Of course I'll open it," he said. "But maybe later. We have a cake to cut." I felt the color flood my cheeks. My son had actually put my gift aside without even looking at its contents. All these people saw him brush aside what I had prepared with such trepidation. It was at that moment that the unexpected happened. Victor, the banker, a little tipsy, and apparently determined to lighten the mood, took the box from the table. "Come on, Pierce," he said with fake cheerfulness. "Let's see what's inside. Maybe it's the keys to a vintage Rolls-Royce." Everyone laughed. Victor tried to open the box, but the lock was old and required some skill. He yanked the lid clumsily, and it rattled threateningly. "Careful!" I exclaimed, taking a step forward. "This thing is very fragile." Victor returned the box to Pierce with an apologetic smile. "I apologize, Professor," he said. "I miscalculated the force." Pierce took the box and looked at it with slight irritation. Apparently, he was beginning to tire of the whole thing. "What's inside, Father?" he asked. "Why don't you just tell me?" "I'd rather you open it yourself," I answered firmly. "It's a family heirloom that I'd like to give to you personally." Pierce sighed, but before he could do anything, Elliot Price, his golf partner, intervened. "Family heirlooms?" He grinned. "Pierce, you never mentioned family heirlooms." "Because there aren't any," Pierce replied with a nervous chuckle. "Unless my father has been hiding the Quigley inheritance from me all these years." Laughter rippled through the room. I stood frozen, unable to believe my ears. My son was actually mocking me and our family legacy in front of his rich friends. Pierce," I said quietly but firmly, "in this box is a gold pocket watch that belonged to your great-grandfather. It's been passed down in our family from father to son for over 100 years." There was silence for a few seconds. Pierce looked at the box with renewed interest, but before he could say anything, Blanche put her hand on his shoulder. "Darling, why don't you open it later? The guests are waiting for you to cut the cake." Pierce nodded and turned to the rest of the gifts. He picked up one of them, a large box in shiny wrapping, and began to unwrap it. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the process. I stood there, feeling a heaviness growing inside. My son didn't even bother to open my gift. He put it aside as something insignificant, unworthy of attention amid the more colorful and expensive gifts. Suddenly, Pierce exclaimed enthusiastically, pulling out of the box some electronic device I didn't recognize. "Wow, the latest model." "Thank you, Victor. That's exactly what I wanted, the guests murmured approvingly, and Victor smiled proudly. My jewelry box remained forgotten among the pile of wrapping paper, not even opened. I watched what was happening, feeling like a ghost at this celebration of life. Then Pierce moved on to the next gift, and the next, each time becoming more enthusiastic about the expensive accessories and electronics. My jewelry box got lost amongst the general chaos of torn packages. Finally, when all the gifts had been opened, except mine, Blanche announced that it was time to move on to the cake. Pierce stood in the center, preparing to blow out the candles. At that moment, Olivia Lang, the same woman from the gallery who had shown me kindness, noticed the forgotten jewelry box. "Pierce," she said, "what about your father's gift? You haven't opened it yet." All eyes turned to the box and then to me. I felt the color come back to my cheeks, now ashamed of my son. Pierce paused, clearly displeased that someone had reminded him of my humble gift in the midst of all this opulence. "Oh yes," he said with a strange smile, taking the box. "Father said it was some kind of old clock." He carelessly tried to open the lid, but the lock was jamming again. Pierce yanked harder than he should have, and I flinched, fearing for the safety of the mechanism. "What the?" he mumbled, trying to work the lock. "Connaisseur, this thing just won't open." "Let me," I said, stepping forward. "There's a secret in here." But before I could approach, Pierce set the box aside irritably. "You know what? I'll look at it later," he said with undisguised irritation. "We're having a party here." "Come on, Pierce," said Thomas Royce, the cardiac surgeon next door. "Don't you even want to know what's inside?" "Shamanian." "I already know," Pierce replied with sudden irritation. "Dad said it was some old clock, a family heirloom." He said the last two words with such sarcasm that I physically felt the pain, as if I'd been punched. "What kind of beggar's gift?" Pierce suddenly blurted out, looking right at me. "An old watch? Really? I thought you'd give me a normal gift for once in your life." There was a deafening silence in the room. Even the musicians stopped playing, sensing the tension in the air. "Pierce!" Blanche gasped, but there was more surprise than judgment in her voice. And then something terrible happened. One of the guests, I couldn't see who, giggled nervously. That chuckle, like a spark, set the others on fire. A wave of laughter swept through the room, nervous at first, then more open. People laughed not so much at the joke as at the awkwardness of the situation, but it didn't matter to me. My own son called my gift, a family heirloom I'd kept all these years, beggarly, and his guests laughed. Blanche, trying to smooth things over, was smiling nervously too, though she cast concerned glances back and forth at me and Pierce. I stood there, numb with shock and pain. The air seemed to thicken around me, and I found it hard to breathe. 73 years of my life, and I'd never felt so humiliated, so insignificant. In that moment, something broke inside me. That thin thread of hope that I had so carefully guarded all these years for a restored relationship with my son broke with a deafening clang that only I seemed to hear. Without a word, I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Olivia call my name, but I didn't stop. As I passed the gift table, I realized that I couldn't take the box. It was my gift, and to take it would be to admit that I'd made a mistake. Let it remain as a reminder of what's really important in life. "Dad, wait!" Pierce's voice caught up with me at the living room door. He sounded uncertain, as if his son was only now beginning to realize that he'd gone too far. I stopped and turned around. Pierce was standing a few feet away from me, surrounded by the hushed guests. Blanche was holding his hand, as if afraid he would follow me. "I am going," I said quietly, but in the silence my voice sounded clear. "I won't interfere with your celebration." "Look, I didn't mean to," Pierce started to say, but I raised my hand to stop him. "No, that's exactly what you meant," I said, surprised at my own calmness. And I said, "It's okay. Now I know what you're really thinking." I looked at the box that had been left on the table among the other gifts. "Open the box when I leave," I said, addressing not only Pierce, but everyone here. "Maybe then you'll realize what real value means." With those words, I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. As I walked through the hallway, I heard voices in the living room again. Quiet at first, then louder. Life went on. My presence or absence changed nothing in this brilliant world of my son's. Outside, I took a deep breath of the evening air. It was dark, and streetlights illuminated the perfectly manicured walkways of this upscale neighborhood. I started walking, not thinking about how I would get home. I just walked, feeling each step taking me further away from that humiliating moment in the living room. I don't know how long I walked before I realized I was on the main road leading from Oak Ridge to downtown Greenwood. Cars were passing by, their headlights catching the figure of an elderly man walking along the curb for a moment out of the darkness. I raised my hand, trying to stop the cab, and one of them soon slowed down. "Where are we going?" the driver asked as I got into the back seat. "Closter Street, 32, I answered, giving him the address of my house. "Are you all right, sir?" the cabbie asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "You look pale." "I'm perfectly fine," I replied. "Just tired." It was true, I was tired. Tired of hoping, tired of trying to make things work, tired of holding on to a past that would never come back, tired of pretending that everything could be fixed, that one day my son would see me not as a burden, not as a reminder of his humble origins, but as a father who loved him no matter what. As the cab drove through Greenwood at night, I stared out the window at the lights of the city where I'd lived all my life. A strange calm came over me, the calm of a man who had made an important decision. When I entered my house, the silence came over me with renewed force. I went into the study and sat down at the desk. On it were the papers I had been looking over a few days before, a draft drawn up by my attorney, Harold Fromm. We'd discussed the possibility of donating some of my estate to charity, but I'd kept putting off a final decision, hoping that my relationship with Pierce would improve. I knew now that those hopes were an illusion. I picked up a pen and began making changes to the document. All my possessions, the house, the plot of land in downtown Greenwood, my rare book collection, my savings, would now go to a fund to support language students that I had long wanted to establish. Eleanor would have approved of that decision. She had always said that the real legacy was not money, but the knowledge and opportunities we gave to the next generation. Finished with the paperwork, I went to the window. It was beginning to dawn outside. I had spent the whole night working, but I didn't feel tired. On the contrary, for the first time in a long time, I felt clarity and determination. I knew Pierce would be shocked when he found out about my decision. He might even try to contest the will, but by then I would have already realized the other part of my plan: sell the house, most of my belongings, and leave Greenwood. I'll start a new life somewhere by the sea, maybe in that little coastal town where Eleanor and I spent our honeymoon. I'll study the local dialect, write the research I've always dreamed of, but never found the time. My phone was on the table, and I glanced at it, knowing it would start ringing soon. Pierce would probably open the box, see the clock, read the note. He might even feel ashamed of his words. But will it matter? Would it fix what was broken tonight? I knew the answer. Some things cannot be repaired. Like shards of broken glass, they can be put back together, but the cracks will always remain. And I no longer wanted to live with those cracks, pretending they didn't exist. With surprising clarity, I realized that I was ready to let go of the past, to let go of my hopes of repairing my relationship with my son, to let go even of my resentment. It was time to live for myself, for the goals and hobbies that had always given me joy and meaning. I sat down and began writing a letter to Lydia, my former student, who offered to give me some lectures. I informed her that I was not only willing to lecture, but also to offer the university the manuscript of a study on the dialects of coastal regions that I had been secretly working on for a long time. A new chapter was beginning in my life, and I was surprised to find myself looking forward with a hope I had not felt in years. There was an awkward silence in the living room after I left. I didn't see it, but I can imagine the guests looking around, not knowing what to say. At times like that, people are usually looking for something to fill the pause. A misplaced joke, a fake laugh, a feigned interest in something extraneous. Pierce must have stood looking at the door that had closed behind me, feeling the stares of the crowd. His face probably expressed a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. Embarrassment over the scene I'd made, and annoyance that his perfect holiday had been ruined. A few days later, I found out what happened next from Olivia Lang. She called me to see if I was okay and told me about the events that unfolded after I left. "Your son looks stunned," she said. Everyone stood in awkward silence until Blanche took control of the situation. "Well," Blanche said, clapping her hands with feigned cheerfulness, "let's get back to celebrating. Pierce, dear, you haven't blown out the candles on the cake yet." But Pierce didn't move. He was staring at the box I'd left behind. "He said to open it," Pierce said quietly. "Of course we'll open it," Blanche answered a little nervously. "But let's finish the cake first. After all, 40 years is only once in a lifetime." "No," Pierce shook his head. "I want to open it now." He took the box in his hands and walked to the table. Blanche followed him, as did some of the guests, driven by curiosity. The others remained at the hors d'oeuvres table, talking in low voices and casting glances at Pierce. Pierce set the box on the table and began to examine it closely. The castle was old and had its own features. I remembered my father showing me the secret of opening it. You had to press down lightly on the top of the lid while sliding the little brass tab on the side. "Let me," Blanche said, holding out her hand. "I've opened similar antiques at the gallery." She took the box and began to examine it with professional interest. "Beautiful work," she said, running her finger over the inlay. "Probably late 19th century, ivory and mahogany. In good condition, it could be worth a lot." She carefully explored the edges of the box until she found the hidden mechanism. A slight click and the lid lifted slightly. Blanche carefully opened it fully. A collective sigh resounded in the room. Inside, on a cushion of dark blue velvet, lay a gold pocket watch. Even in the dim light of the living room, one could see how nobly the metal shone, how elegantly the engraving on the lid was done. Pierce stared at the watch in silence, evidently not expecting to see something like this. Blanche, whose professional eye had been trained by years of work in an art gallery, was the first to realize the value of the object. "My God," she whispered, carefully taking out the watch. "It's a real work of art." She turned the watch over, looking at the engraving on the back, the Quigley family crest and the date, 1887. "Pierce, it's gold," she said reverently, "and very old." Pierce finally came out of his daze and took the watch from his wife's hands. He opened the lid, revealing a mother-of-pearl dial with Roman numerals and engraved on the inside, "Tempus neminem manet." "Time waits for no one," he translated quietly. Years of studying Latin at school had not gone to waste. Thomas Royce, a heart surgeon who was standing nearby, whistled. "I know a little about antiques," he said, "and I can tell you that this is Swiss work of the highest quality, probably made to order. Such things are now worth tens of thousands of dollars, if not more." Blanche, still examining the box, found a folded piece of paper pinned to the inside of the lid. "There's a note here," she said, carefully removing it. Pierce took the sheet and unfolded it. It was my letter, written in calligraphy on heavy ivory paper. "Dear Pierce, this pocket watch is not just a family heirloom. It is a symbol of the Quigley legacy, a reminder of those who have gone before us to break new ground. Your great-grandfather, Professor Emmett Quigley, received it from Oxford University for his contribution to the decipherment of the Cretan linear letter A. From him it passed to your grandfather Hubert and then to me. Today, on your 40th birthday, I pass them on to you, completing the circle. Tempus neminem manet." The inscription on them reads, "Time waits for no one." May these words remind you of the transience of life and the importance of the legacy we leave behind. Love, your father. Pierce read the letter aloud, and his voice gradually grew quieter and quieter. When he finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. All the guests looked at him, not knowing what to say. Some looked embarrassed, others genuinely shocked. "Narration. Did your great-grandfather decipher the Cretan letter?" Victor Hammond was the first to break the silence. "The Emmett Quigley? I read about him at the university." Pierce looked stunned. He had never taken much interest in family history, finding the academic achievements of his ancestors boring and irrelevant in the modern world. Now holding in his hands the tangible proof of their heritage, he seemed to realize for the first time the significance of his surname. "Yeah, I didn't know," he said quietly. "My father never told me." "He did," Olivia Lang objected softly. "You just didn't listen." Pierce gave her a sharp look, but said nothing. He looked at the watch again, ran his finger over the engraving, as if trying to physically connect with the past. Blanche, always practical, was the first to realize the awkwardness of the situation. She put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Pierce, you need to call your father," she said quietly. "Right now." Pierce nodded and pulled out his cell phone. He stepped aside, dialing my number. I imagined him standing at the window, listening to the long beeps that went unanswered. Of course, I didn't answer. I was in a cab returning home at that moment and had left my phone off. Meanwhile, the guests were in an awkward position. The celebration was effectively ruined, but no one knew how to leave nicely. Some began to pack up, quietly saying goodbye to Blanche and expressing their best wishes to the birthday boy. Olivia said that Blanche held herself with remarkable dignity as she saw her guests off and assured them that everything was fine. But her strained smile couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. Pierce kept dialing my number over and over. When the last guest had left, he and Blanche were alone in the empty living room amidst the uneaten hors d'oeuvres, untouched cake, and torn gift wrappers. "Why isn't he answering?" Pierce asked with a hint of irritation that masked his growing anxiety. "He's upset," Blanche replied, starting to pick up the scattered wrapping paper. "He has every right to be." "I didn't mean to offend him," Pierce said, and for the first time that evening, there was genuine regret in his voice. "It just came out." "Slipped out?" Blanche stopped and looked at her husband. "Pierce, you called his gift beggarly, in front of all our friends, in front of his coworkers." "Thomas and Olivia are not his colleagues," Pierce objected weakly. "It doesn't matter," said Blanche. "The point is, you humiliated your father, a man who came to congratulate you even though you barely speak to each other." Pierce was silent, fiddling with his watch. For the first time in years, he was looking at it closely, noting every detail, every scratch on the case, every letter of the engraving. It wasn't just a watch. It was his family's history embodied in metal. "We should go to him," he suddenly decided. "Right now." "It's almost midnight," Blanche objected. "Narrator, better wait until morning. Give him time to cool off." But Pierce was already on his way out, throwing on his jacket. "I owe you an explanation. Apologize. This can't wait." Blanche knew her husband well enough to realize that when he made a decision, it was impossible to talk him out of it. She only sighed and continued cleaning, knowing it was going to be a long night. Pierce got into his expensive car and headed toward my house. The whole way, he kept dialing my number, but to no avail. It was past midnight when he pulled up to my modest two-story house on Gloucester Street. The windows were dark, no sign of life. He knocked on the door, gently at first, then more insistently. There was no answer. The bell went unheeded, too. Pierce walked around the house, peering in the windows, but everywhere was dark. A neighbor who heard the noise came out onto her front porch. "Who's there?" she called out warily. "I'll call the police." "It's Pierce Quigley, the professor's son," he answered. "I'm looking for my father. Have you seen him?" My neighbor, Mrs. Parker, had lived next door to me for 20 years and knew the family well. "Oh, it's you, Pierce," she said, recognizing him. "No, I haven't seen your father since this morning. He left this afternoon, I think, for your birthday." "Yes, he was at my place, but he's gone now," Pierce replied. "Are you sure you didn't see him come back?" "No, darling, I would have. I was just at home all evening watching the show by the window." Pierce thanked her and went back to his car. He dialed my number again, still to no avail. Where could I be? Pierce started going through his options. Maybe I'd gone to a friend's or coworker's house. But at this late hour, it was unlikely. To the hospital? The thought made him go cold. What if something happened to me on the way home? He began calling nearby hospitals, asking if an elderly man named Norbert Quigley had been admitted. They all said no. Then he remembered my close friend and colleague, Professor Fielding. Despite the lateness of the hour, he found the number and called. "Professor Fielding, this is Piers Quigley, Norbert's son. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour." "Pierce?" Fielding's sleepy voice gradually cleared. "What's wrong? Is your father all right?" "I was hoping you could tell me. You wouldn't happen to have him here, would you?" "No, of course not. It's 2 o'clock in the morning." "What's going on?" Pierce briefly explained the situation, omitting the details of his behavior at the party. Fielding listened in silence. "I haven't seen Norbert for days," he said at last. "Sure he was, but I'm sure he's all right. Your father is a very independent man. Perhaps he just doesn't want to talk right now." "But he's not at home," exclaimed Pierce. "Where could he have gone in the middle of the night? To a hotel?" Fielding suggested. "Or just turned off his cell phone and went to bed. He's a sound sleeper, you know." Pierce wasn't sure he knew such details about my life, but he didn't say anything. "Call him in the morning," Fielding advised. "I'm sure it'll clear up." Pierce thanked him and hung up. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the dark windows of my house, then started the engine and drove away. When he got home, he found Blanche had finished cleaning and was waiting for him with a cup of tea. "Did you find him?" she asked. "No," Pierce shook his head. "He's not at home, nor in the hospitals." "Fielding doesn't know anything." "Maybe he just doesn't want to talk to you today," Blanche said softly. "And it's hard to blame him." Pierce sat down on the sofa, still holding the watch he had brought with him. "I didn't know they were so special," he said quietly. "I thought it was just some old trinket." "Even if it was just a trinket," Blanche replied, sitting down next to him, "your reaction would still be unacceptable." Pierce looked at his wife in surprise. She usually supported him in everything, especially when it came to my outdated values. "I always thought your father was too attached to the past," Blanche continued, as if reading his mind. "But today you crossed the line, Pierce. And it's not about the value of the gift, it's about respect." Pierce was silent. He opened the watch again and watched the second hand continue its inexorable run down the dial. Time waits for no one. This simple truth suddenly took on a new, deep meaning for him. All night, Pierce tried to call me. He called every half hour, hoping I'd finally answer. By morning, my phone had accumulated 47 missed calls, 42 from Pierce, 3 from Blanche, and 2 from Olivia Lang. But I didn't answer it. After the cab, I did go home, but only to pack the necessary things. Then I booked a room in a small hotel on the outskirts of town and turned off my phone. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. And I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to talk to my son right now. In the morning, Pierce drove to my house again. He knocked on the door, rang the bell, walked around the house looking in the windows. Neighbors began to come outside, attracted by the noise. "What's the matter, young man?" asked Mr. Jenkins, an elderly gardener who lived across the street. "I'm looking for my father," Pierce replied. "He won't answer the phone, and he's not at home." "I saw him last night," said Mr. Jenkins. "He came back in a cab, but he didn't stay long. Then he left again with a small suitcase." "Where to?" Henri, Pierce asked, feeling the anxiety growing inside him. "I have no idea," Jenkins shrugged. "Another cab came after him, but he looked okay, if that's what you're worried about. It wasn't like he'd been kidnapped or anything." Pierce thanked him and went back to the car. He called Blanche. "Dad left home with a suitcase," he said. "No one knows where?" "Gonna, maybe he's just taking a break," Blanche suggested. "Give him time, Pierce. He'll come back when he's ready." But Pierce couldn't wait. He began calling every hotel in Greenwood, asking if Norbert Quigley was staying there. Most places answered in the negative. Some refused to give him information about their guests. As the day wore on, I kept missing. Pierce kept calling, leaving voicemails, sending text messages. With each passing hour, his messages grew more desperate. "Father, please answer me. I'm worried. I'm so sorry. I've been an idiot. That watch is amazing. I didn't realize their significance. Please give me a chance to apologize." By the evening of the next day, Pierce's anxiety had turned to sheer panic. He even considered going to the police, but Blanche talked him out of it. "It's only been 24 hours, Pierce. The police won't take a missing persons report on an adult who simply doesn't answer the phone, especially since the neighbor saw him voluntarily leave with his suitcase." "But what if something happened to him afterward?" Pierce insisted. "He's 73 years old." "Your father is in fine shape for his age," reminded Blanche. "And he doesn't suffer from dementia or any other illness that would put him in danger. He just doesn't want to talk to you, Pierce, and I can understand that." Pierce looked at his wife in bewilderment. When did she get to my side? Blanche has always been the epitome of practicality and a modern outlook on life. She never took much interest in my academic achievements or family history. "Since when have you been defending my father?" Pierce asked. Blanche sighed. "I'm not defending your father, Pierce. I'm just pointing out the obvious. You did a terrible thing, and now you're paying for it. And it's not the watch." "Then what is it?" Pierce really didn't understand. It's about respect, Blanche replied. It's that you never really appreciated your father. You've only seen him for what he isn't. Rich, powerful, connected to your world of finance. But you never saw what he is. A respected scholar, a man of principles, a keeper of history. Pierce was silent, digesting her words. He twirled the gold watch in his hands, listening to its quiet, rhythmic ticking. This watch had seen more than he could imagine. It had witnessed family history, passing from hand to hand, from father to son. And now it was in his possession, the last of the Quigley family, a man who had nearly rejected his heritage out of foolish pride and ostentatious disregard. I must find him, Pierce said firmly. Must make things right. Blanche looked at her husband doubtfully. She knew him well enough to realize that his sudden remorse might be caused not so much by the realization of his wrongdoing as by the fear of losing something valuable, whether it was a family heirloom or a potential inheritance. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to keep looking, Pierce answered. I'll call all his acquaintances, colleagues, students. Someone must know where he is. And so he began a methodical investigation. He called everyone who might know something about my whereabouts, went through the address book he found in my office during another visit to an empty house, asked neighbors. He even contacted the university where I taught, but no one there had seen me since last week. Time passed and I still hadn't shown up or answered my cell phone. 47 missed calls turned into 123, then 250. The voice messages became more and more desperate, but I remained unreachable. Finally, on the fourth day, Pierce received a short message from an unfamiliar number. I'm fine. I just need some time. Don't look for me. Norbert. This message brought both relief and a new wave of anxiety. I was alive and conscious. That's the most important thing. But I signed my name, not Dad or Father, and I asked them not to look for me. That was serious. Pierce showed the message to Blanche. What should I do? He asked with genuine desperation in his voice. What he asks, she answered simply. To give him time. A small room at the Hampton Inn on the outskirts of Greenwood became my temporary refuge. The simple furnishings, the impersonal decor, the silence all helped me focus my thoughts. My decision to leave my son's birthday party wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of years of tension, misunderstanding, and mutual alienation. I sat on the edge of my bed, fiddling with my turned-off cell phone. I didn't need to turn it on to know there would be dozens of missed calls from Pierce, not out of genuine concern, but out of guilt, or worse, out of concern for his inheritance after seeing the gold watch. The words beggar's gift were still ringing in my ears, amplified by the laughter of his friends. I stayed up all night, going over what had happened in my head and considering my options for further action. By morning, the plan was finally formed. I took out a notebook and a pen from my suitcase, writing down the necessary things to do. The first thing to do was to contact Harold Fromm and prepare a new will, then organize the transfer of the property to the foundation and look for a place to live in Cedar Crest. And finally, write a letter to Pierce explaining my decisions. Cedar Crest is a small coastal town 300 miles south of Greenwood. Eleanor and I had honeymooned there 47 years ago, and it had remained a symbol of pure, untainted happiness to me ever since. It was where I wanted to start a new life. I turned the phone on only to make one call and then turned it off again. Harold Fromm, my lawyer and friend of nearly 40 years, answered after the second ringtone. Norbert, what an unexpected call at this early hour. I'm sorry to bother you, Harold, but the matter is urgent. Can we meet today? Harold was silent for a second. No, of course, my friend. Is something wrong? I've made a decision, the one we talked about a few months ago. A pause again, then an understanding one. A charitable foundation? Yes, and I want to finalize it as soon as possible. We arranged to meet at his office at 10 o'clock in the morning. I had breakfast in my room, then called a cab. Harold's office was in downtown Greenwood, a glass building where his law firm occupied an entire floor. Harold met me in the reception area, a tall, lean man with a neatly trimmed gray beard. We'd been friends since graduate school, when he studied law and I studied linguistics. Life had taken us down different professional paths, but our friendship remained. Norbert, he shook my hand firmly, scrutinizing my face. You look determined. I am. We walked into his office, a large room overlooking the city park. Diplomas and certificates hung on the walls, and the shelves were filled with legal tomes. Harold sat me down in a leather chair and sat across from me. So you're ready to set up a foundation. What's changed? The last time we discussed it, you were still hesitant. I didn't go into all the details of yesterday's incident. I just said, something happened that finally convinced me Pierce will never appreciate what's important to me. My legacy will be better preserved through the support of young scholars, not by giving the property to a son who sees only material value in it. Harold nodded. He had witnessed my son and I's estrangement over the years, and although he had never directly spoken out on the subject, I knew he understood. Good. I had drafted a charter for the foundation back when we first talked about it. We'll need to make some changes, discuss the details. But the main question is, what exactly do you want to give to the foundation? Everything, I answered simply. Sure, my house, my land, my collection of rare books, my savings. Except for a small sum I'll keep for myself to start a new life elsewhere. Harold didn't look surprised, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Are you sure, Norbert? Your house isn't just real estate. It's where you and Eleanor have lived your whole life. It's where your memories, which I will take with me. I finished the sentence. The house is the walls. Memories are here. I touched my chest. Pierce has never lived in this house as an adult. To him, it's just a potential asset that can be sold when needed. I'd rather he put it to the benefit of those who truly appreciate what was important to Eleanor and me. We spent several hours discussing the details. The foundation was to support talented students of ancient languages and linguistics, provide grants for research and expeditions, and fund the publication of scholarly works. The house could become the foundation's headquarters, and my collection of rare books could become the basis for a specialized library. What shall we call the foundation? Harold asked, taking notes. The Eleanor and Norbert Quigley Foundation, I answered without hesitation. Dutchun or just the Quigley Foundation. Let the name be associated with science and support for education, not financial speculation. Harold nodded understandingly. It will take time to prepare all the documents, get the necessary permits and registrations, perhaps a few months. As long as it takes, the important thing is to start the process. What about Pierce? Harold asked cautiously. He'll try to contest the will. No doubt, I nodded. But he won't stand a chance. I'm of sound mind and good judgment. There is no legal basis for challenging my decision. Legally, yes, but there'll be a scandal, a public trial. Are you ready for that? I've been thinking. Publicity had never appealed to me. I'd always preferred a quiet academic life, but that didn't matter now. Ready, I answered firmly. If Pierce decided to disgrace the family name with a public trial over money, it would only confirm the correctness of my decision. We ended the meeting with the agreement that Harold would prepare all the necessary documents in the next few days, and I would return to sign them. He also promised to contact a notary public to probate the new will. Walking out of Harold's office, I felt a strange lightness. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I hailed a cab and gave the address of a real estate office downtown. The real estate agent, a young woman named Rebecca, was enthusiastic about helping me find a place to live in Cedar Crest. I explained that I was looking for a small house by the sea, preferably with an ocean view and a garden plot. Budget? She asked me in a business-like manner. I told her the amount I planned to keep out of my total estate. Rebecca's eyes widened. With a budget like that, you'll have no trouble finding a great deal, Mr. Quigley. I'll contact our Cedar Crest office and prepare a selection of offers. We agreed that I would stop by in a couple days to review the options. The next stop was the bank. I opened a new account in my own name and transferred some of my savings into it. Enough for a new life, but not much compared to the total fortune that was to go to the foundation. Back in the hotel room, I finally felt tired. The events of the last 24 hours had come over me in a wave. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes, allowing myself a short rest before tackling the last item on my list, the letter to Pierce. I woke up 2 hours later, feeling refreshed. It was starting to get dark outside the window. Winter days are short. I turned on the desk lamp, pulled out the paper and fountain pen I always carried in my suitcase. Some things required a traditional approach, and a letter to my son was such a case. I sat for a long time pondering every word. I wanted to avoid accusations or recriminations. They would do neither of us any good. At the same time, I had to make my feelings and decisions clear. Dear Pierce, by the time you read this letter, I will be long gone from Greenwood. What happened at your birthday party was just the final act in a long history of misunderstandings between us. I don't blame you. You and I are from different worlds, different values. What for me is of the highest value, knowledge, history, cultural heritage, for you are just outdated relics of the past. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. For years I hoped that we would find common ground, that we could build a bridge across the chasm that separates us. I kept my grandfather's watch, your great-grandfather's watch, hoping that one day it would be a symbol of our reconciliation. I was wrong. I have decided to donate all my possessions, my house, land, book collection, and most of my savings, to a charitable foundation that will support students of ancient languages and linguistics. This is the legacy I want to leave behind. I know you may perceive this as an act of revenge or punishment. It's not. I just finally realized that we have to be honest with each other and with ourselves. You've never shared my passion for knowledge, my respect for the past, and that's okay. But it also means that giving you the material symbols of that passion would be a mistake. You keep the watch. It belonged to your great-grandfather, your grandfather, and me. Now it's yours. What you do with it is your decision. Whether you sell it, keep it in a safe, or donate it to a museum is irrelevant. I am letting go not only of you, but also of my attachment to the material symbols of the past. I'm starting a new life. Don't look for me. Don't try to change my decision. It is made after much thought and with full knowledge of the consequences. Harold Frum is already preparing the necessary paperwork. I want you to know that no matter what, I love you. You're my son, a part of Eleanor and me. But love doesn't mean blindly accepting everything the person you love does. Sometimes loving means letting go. I wish you happiness and success on your journey. I hope that one day you will understand my decision. Love, your father. I reread the letter several times, making minor edits. Then I folded the sheets, put them in an envelope, and wrote my son's name on it. I didn't include an address. The letter wasn't meant for the mail. I planned to leave it with Harold to give to Pierce after the legal formalities were completed. As I completed the last item on my list, I felt a strange peace of mind. The decision had been made. There was no turning back, and that was liberating. For the first time in years, I could think about the future without a shadow of reticence or unrealized hopes. I decided to turn on my phone to see if Rebecca had called with news about the houses in Cedar Crest. As soon as the device came to life, it began to vibrate continuously with notifications of missed calls and messages. 47 missed calls, most from Pierce, a few from Blanche, and a couple from Olivia Lang. Dozens of voice messages and text notifications. I didn't bother listening to the messages. Instead, I wrote a short text from the new temporary number I'd acquired this morning. I'm fine. I just need some time. Don't look for me. Norbert. After sending it to Pierce, I turned the phone off again. There was a knock on the room door. It was a messenger from the real estate office with a package from Rebecca. The first set of housing options in Cedar Crest. I thanked him and returned to the desk. Opening the folder, I started looking through the offerings. A few oceanfront cottages, a couple houses in secluded coves, even a small villa on a cliff with a panoramic view of the sea. All were in my price range, although some needed repairs or upgrades. One option in particular caught my eye. A small colonial-style wooden house perched on a hill overlooking the bay. The house came with a plot of land large enough for a garden and a small gazebo where one could work on warm days. The description mentioned that the house was about 80 years old, but was in good condition thanks to the caring owners. Something about the house reminded me of my and Eleanor's first visit to Cedar Crest. We stayed in a small hotel on the beach and walked around the neighborhood every day, dreaming of one day buying a house here. Life turned out differently. Working at Greenwood University, Pierce's birth, academic commitments. The dream of a house by the sea remained a dream. Now at 73, I could finally realize it. Without Eleanor, but with her invisible presence in my heart, I set aside the brochure with the house on the hill and made a note for Rebecca. That was the option I was most interested in. Then I returned to the rest of the offerings, studying each one methodically. It was well into the evening when there was a knock on the door. I tensed. The only people who knew where I was were Harold and Rebecca, and I wasn't expecting a visit. Had Pierce somehow tracked me down? "Who's there?" I asked without opening the door. "Delivery service, sir. I have a package for Mr. Quigley." I opened the door cautiously. Indeed, a young man in a delivery uniform was holding out a small envelope. "Who was it from?" I asked, accepting it. "From Mr. Frum, sir. He asked me to tell you that it was urgent." I thanked the courier and closed the door. The envelope contained a short handwritten text from Harold. "Norbert, Pierce came to my office. He is looking for you and is very concerned. I haven't said anything about our plans, but he is persistent. Be careful. He may be checking out hotels. I suggest we speed things up. I've prepared the first set of documents to be signed. I can be at your place at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning if you don't want to risk showing up in town. Let me know." Harold, the letter got me thinking. I didn't want to hide from my son like a criminal, but I wasn't ready for an emotional confrontation either. I needed to keep my mind clear and my decision firm. I called Harold from the hotel phone, not wanting to turn on my cell phone. "Thanks for the warning," I said when he answered. "I think it would be best if you came here." "I agree," Harold replied. "I'll be at your place at 8. How are you feeling, Norbert?" "It's not an easy decision." Surprisingly calm, I admitted. It was as if everything was finally falling into place. We said goodbye, and I went back to looking at housing options. The thought of Pierce actively looking for me was unpleasant, but it didn't change my plans. Tomorrow I'd sign the first papers, then contact Rebecca about going to Cedar Crest. The sooner I get out of Greenwood, the better. As I fell asleep that night, I thought not of Pierce or our broken bond, but of the house on the hill overlooking the ocean. About the garden I could plant there. About the books I'd finally write. About the new chapter of life about to begin. At 73, most people take stock. I, on the other hand, felt like I was on the cusp of something new and exciting. The morning breeze from the ocean brought the smell of salt and seaweed, filling my small office with freshness. I had set up my workspace on the veranda of the wooden house I had purchased almost 6 months ago. The view of Cedar Crest, a coastal town perched at the foot of a hill, and the endless ocean merging into the horizon, was breathtaking. 6 months flew by. I spent the first few weeks fixing up the house, an old colonial-era structure that needed attention and care. I hired a local carpenter to repair the veranda, painted the walls myself in light colors reminiscent of sandy beaches, and gradually furnished the rooms with simple but comfortable furniture. No luxuries, only necessities and books, many of which I brought with me or purchased at a small, second-hand bookstore in downtown Cedar Crest. My special pride was the garden. I spent an hour or two every morning tending to the plants, planting new ones, planning the layout of beds and paths. Eleanor loved gardening, and I felt her invisible presence as I worked the soil. Life in the small town was exactly as I had dreamed it would be, quiet, measured, and filled with simple pleasures. The locals welcomed me with friendly curiosity. There was no need to explain who I was or what I did. It was enough to be a neighbor who nods when you meet and occasionally stops to chat at the post office or the cafe on the main street. For the first month, I avoided any contact with the outside world, except for Harold Fromm, who periodically updated me on the progress of the legal procedures to establish the foundation and transfer the property. I didn't turn on my phone. I didn't check my mail. I didn't read the newspapers. I needed this time to completely detach myself from my past life, to clear my mind of the accumulated bitterness. Gradually, I began to return to the academic world, not physically, but intellectually. I resumed correspondence with colleagues from different countries who were surprised by my new address, but tactfully did not ask unnecessary questions. I subscribed to several linguistic journals, and most importantly, I returned to the research I had been putting off for years. Cedar Crest and the surrounding coastal villages were once isolated fishing villages. A unique dialect of English developed here, incorporating elements of several European languages, maritime slang, and local idioms. With the development of roads, television, and the internet, this dialect gradually died out, surviving only in the speech of the older generation. I set myself the task of documenting this dialect while its speakers are still alive. Every day I talked to elderly fishermen and their wives, recorded their stories, and noted the peculiarities of pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. They eagerly shared stories of their lives, tales of the sea, and legends passed down from generation to generation. Mr. Hedges, an 82-year-old former fishing boat captain, became my main informant. We would sit for hours on the veranda of his house overlooking the harbor, and he would tell me about storms, catches, sailors' superstitions, and the unwritten laws of their community. His speech was a living museum piece, full of archaisms, borrowings from Portuguese and Dutch, spoken with a particular intonation unique to this coast. By the end of the 5th month, I had accumulated an impressive amount of material: notes, memos, phonetic and grammatical diagrams. I began to write a monograph, which was to be the first systematic description of the Sittercrest dialect. The work completely absorbed me. I woke up at dawn full of new ideas and often sat up until late at night, analyzing the collected data. It was for this activity that I was caught by the letter carrier that morning when he delivered a letter that changed the course of my thoughts. "Good morning, Professor," he called me from the garden path. "A registered letter from Greenwood." I came down from the veranda to accept the envelope. It bore the official stamp of Harold's law firm. "Thank you, Jim. How's your wife?" "Much better, Professor. That herbal tea you recommended is doing wonders for her arthritis." We talked a little more about the weather and local news before Jim continued on his route. I returned to the veranda and opened the envelope. The letter from Harold contained official notification that all legal procedures had been finalized to establish the Eleanor and Norbert Quigley Foundation and transfer my property to it. The house in Greenwood, the collection of rare books, the land, everything was properly formalized. The foundation had already begun its activities. The first grants had been made to 3 young linguists to research endangered languages. The official document was accompanied by a handwritten note from Harold. "Dear Norbert, I am pleased to inform you that all formalities have been completed. The foundation is up and running. The Board of Trustees that you approved has begun its work. The first grants have already been made. I am enclosing summaries of the projects and their authors. I must inform you, however, that Pierce is attempting to contest the will. He has hired the Bradford law firm and has filed a lawsuit claiming that your decision was made under the influence of a temporary mental breakdown caused by a family conflict. I'm not worried about the outcome of the case. All the paperwork is in order, and your capacity is unquestionable. But it could take a while. Pierce has come to my office several times demanding your address. I, of course, refused. He seems, changed. Slimmed down, gaunt. He says he wants to apologize, but I'm not sure he's sincere. I hope you found peace in your new home. If you're ever in Greenwood, let me know. It would be nice to meet you. Your friend, Harold." I put the letter aside and looked out at the ocean for a long time. The news that the formalities of the foundation had been completed was gratifying. My life's work would continue in the work of young scientists. But Pierce's attempts to contest the will? I had expected that, but I still felt a pang of disappointment. So no matter what, money is more important to him than relationships. I wrote back to Harold the same day, acknowledging receipt of the documents and thanking him for all his trouble. I mentioned Pierce only briefly. "As for your son, proceed as you see fit. I have not changed my mind and will not revisit the matter." I sealed the letter and set it aside to send the next day. The rest of the day passed as usual. Work on the monograph, lunch at a small cafe by the harbor, an evening walk along the shore. But thoughts of Pierce never left me. What had happened in Greenwood during those 6 months? How did Pierce feel about my departure and the inheritance decision? Harold had written that he seemed changed, but what exactly had changed? His appearance or his essence? Unbeknownst to me, I began to imagine Pierce returning to his parents' empty house, wandering through the rooms, perhaps for the first time really noticing details that had escaped his attention before. Pictures on the walls, books on the shelves, traces of a life his parents had lived without him. I imagined him sitting in my office, perhaps with a gold watch in his hands, trying to understand why his father had chosen to give everything he had gained to strangers rather than to his own son. Has he realized that it's not about money and possessions, but about principles and values? It was early spring in Greenwood. I knew this because I had recently received a letter from Lydia, my former student and now chair of the Ancient Languages Department. She wrote about the first crocuses in the university garden, about students out on the lawns after a long winter, about new courses and projects. The letter breathed life and energy, reminding me of the world I had left behind. Was I happy here at Cedar Crest? Yes, absolutely. A quiet life, interesting work, friendly neighbors, and the beauty of nature all filled my days with meaning and joy. But sometimes, especially in the evenings, when I sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, a wave of loneliness came over me. At such times, I would talk to Eleanor as if she were there. I would tell her about my research, about the people I had met, about my plans for the future. I knew she would approve of my choices. She had always supported my scientific pursuits and dreamed of a house by the sea as much as I did. But what would she say about my decision to cut ties with Pierce? Would she have supported such a radical move? I wasn't sure. Eleanor had always been gentler, more patient than me, especially when it came to her son. She found excuses for his actions, even when I saw only selfishness and ingratitude. "He's just different, Norbert," she would say. "Not worse or better, just different." Perhaps she was right. Maybe I expected too much from my son, wanted him to be an extension of me, not an independent individual with his own values and priorities. But the words "beggar's gift" still echoed in my ears, as did the laughter of the guests. And it was a reminder that it wasn't about the differences between us, but about the basic respect that Pierce hadn't shown. The next morning, I sent a letter to Harold and decided to take a break from work. The day promised to be clear and warm, perfect for a long walk along the coast. I put on a light cotton suit, a straw hat to protect me from the sun, and set off. The coast near Cedar Crest was an alternation of sandy beaches and rocky areas. I walked along, enjoying the fresh air, the sound of the surf, and the cries of the seagulls. On one of the wild beaches where tourists rarely wandered, I saw Mr. Hedges. He was sitting on a large flat rock and looking at the sea. "Good morning, Captain," I called him, using the address he preferred. "Ah, Professor," he waved his hand at me. "Join us. What a day it's been." I sat down beside him on a rock, warm from the sun. "What brings you here so early?" I asked. "Anniversary," he answered simply. 55 years ago on this day, I first went to sea as captain of my own ship. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "It's a momentous date." Mr. Hedges nodded, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "A lot of water has passed since then. A lot of things have changed, but the sea is the same. It doesn't change, only we change." We were silent, listening to the sound of the waves. "I heard from Greenwood," I said at last. "From my lawyer. The formalities with the foundation have been finalized." "Is this the fund for young scientists you told me about?" Mr. Hedges asked. "Yes, it is now officially in existence and has already begun its work." "It's a good thing," said the old captain. "To pass on knowledge to the next generation? What could be more important?" "My son doesn't think so," I blurted out. "He's trying to challenge my decision." Mr. Hedges shook his head. "Money, it spoils a lot of people, especially those who haven't earned it through hard work." "It's not just about money," I argued. "It's about understanding, respect, family." The old sailor looked at me carefully. "You know, Professor, I didn't always get along with my son either. He didn't want to follow in my footsteps, went to the city, became a lawyer. I took offense for a long time, considered it a betrayal. But then I realized every man must find his own sea, his own way. And now I'm proud of him, even though he's not a captain." "Your case is different," I said. "Your son simply chose a different profession. He didn't humiliate you publicly, didn't make fun of family values." "Maybe so," Mr. Hedges agreed. "But you know what? Resentment is a heavy weight. It drags you down, keeps you from moving forward, especially resentment toward your own children." His words made me wonder, was I really freeing myself from the past by creating a new life here? Or had I just changed the scenery, taking the same pain and resentment with me? We sat on the shore for another hour or so, talking about the sea, about fishing superstitions, about the local dialect, about everything but family relations. Then Mr. Hedges got up, saying he had to go. He had promised his grandchildren to go fishing. I was left alone on the shore, deep in thought. The old captain's words had touched something deep inside me. Was my new life at Cedar Crest an escape or a new beginning? Had I truly let go of the past, or had I simply closed the door, leaving everything as it was behind it? While I was pondering this, back in Greenwood, Pierce was probably preparing for a court hearing to contest my will. I pictured him in an expensive suit with a binder of documents, confident that he was right. I imagined him explaining to the judge that his elderly father was out of his mind when he decided to disinherit his only son. What drove him? Greed, resentment, wounded pride, or perhaps, somewhere deep inside, a sincere desire to restore the relationship, albeit expressed clumsily. I didn't know the answers to these questions, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know them. The past remained the past. I had created a new life here in Cedar Crest and intended to live it on my own terms, following my values. That evening, I received another letter, this time from Olivia Lang, the same woman from the art gallery who had shown me kindness on Pierce's birthday. She wrote that she had met me by chance at a Cedar Crest cafe during her trip up the coast, but had hesitated to approach, not knowing if I wished to socialize with someone from Greenwood. "You look peaceful," she wrote, "and I'm glad you found your place. If you don't mind, I'd like to visit you next time I'm in those parts. The gallery is organizing an exhibition of seascapes by local artists, and I'll be in Cedar Crest at the end of the month." The letter was warm, with no hint of inheritance drama or scandal in Greenwood high society. Olivia simply informed me that she was happy to see me happy and offered companionship. I wrote back, inviting her to drop by my place when she was in town. Communicating with someone from a past life, but not directly connected to painful memories, seemed acceptable and even desirable to me. Besides, Olivia was a connoisseur of art, and I was interested in her opinion of the local artists whose paintings I was beginning to collect. The next days passed in the usual rhythm: work on the monograph, meetings with informants, walks along the shore. But thoughts of Harold's letter and of Pierce returned periodically. I caught myself imagining the trial, the expert testimony, the arguments of the lawyers. Imagine Pierce's face when the court denied his claim. Did I feel satisfaction in that imaginary picture? Number. More like sadness that our relationship had reached a point where only a court could resolve the conflict. One morning, waking up before dawn, I decided to meet the sunrise on the beach. I dressed warmly. The mornings by the sea were still chilly, and left the house when the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. The beach was empty except for a few seagulls swooping at the water's edge. I sat on the sand with my arms around my knees and watched the sea and sky change. First, there was a thin strip of light on the horizon. Then it began to expand, changing color from pale pink to golden. The clouds that hung low over the water turned bright colors, reflecting in the waves. Finally, the edge of the sun's disk appeared over the horizon, and everything was transformed. The sea shimmered with thousands of glints. The sand became golden. The wet stones shone like jewels. I looked at this extravaganza of colors and thought about how beautiful and simple the world is at the same time. How easy it is to forget about its beauty, immersed in personal problems, offenses, conflicts, and how important it is not to miss these moments of pure joy, unmarred by any human squabbles. The sun was rising higher and higher, and with it grew in me a feeling that could hardly be called other than liberation. I finally realized that the past was indeed in the past, that I had not just run away from my problems, but had built a new life based on what I really cared about: on knowledge, on research, on the beauty of nature, on simple human relationships. Yes, I felt the bitterness of losing my son, not physically, but emotionally. That loss was real and painful, but it did not define my whole life, did not rob it of meaning and joy. I also realized that I had no hatred for Pierce, just sadness and maybe a little pity. He never realized that real wealth is not in money and possessions, but in relationships, in knowledge, in the ability to see and appreciate the beauty of the world. In that sense, he was poorer than me, despite all his financial success. Could we ever understand each other? Probably not. We were too different. We saw the world through different prisms. But that didn't mean one of us was worse or better, just different. Eleanor was right, as always. He's just different, Norbert. Not worse or better. just different. When the sun had risen fully above the horizon, I stood up and shook the sand off my clothes. A new day was ahead, with work on my monograph, with conversations with fishermen, with small joys and discoveries, a day in my new life that I had chosen for myself and was happy with. As I walked back home along the shore, I thought about the fact that I might write to Pierce someday, not to make up or change my mind about my inheritance, but just to say, I realize we're different and that's okay. To say I don't hold a grudge, that I let go of the past and wish him to find his happiness, his way. But that won't be today or tomorrow. First, I had to heal myself completely, to let go of the last remnants of resentment and disappointment. I had to become a person who could talk about the past without bitterness, with understanding and wisdom. In the meantime, I just lived each day, enjoying the simple pleasures, the sound of the sea, the taste of fresh fish in the local cafe, conversations with old fishermen, the fragrance of flowers in my garden. I lived in the present, not the past or the future, and it was good. It was the freedom I had been looking for so long.